All right, well, this is a meetup, and one of the things we do at meetups is encourage other people to give talks. So I thought I'd do a lightning talk sharing some tips that I've learned. So the first thing if you want to give a talk, first thing to do is identify what you're trying to do with the audience. So you're trying to educate people, you're trying to inspire people, sometimes you're trying to persuade people, win them over. Think about your audience. What are the likely experiences and mindsets? Like, it's different if you're talking to a bunch of game programmers than a bunch of functional programmer types. I know this from personal experience. Think about what the takeaways are that you have to share. So also, one of the things you have to do is introduce yourself. I, for a long time, didn't do much, but for introducing myself, and I usually make my introductions very short, but it pays to introduce yourself because to connect with your audience, they want to know a bit about you. Most likely you are a regular programmer, and you are definitely an authority on the subject, right? Because you put the talk together, you did the work. So people in general want to hear authoritative, well-founded opinions. They want to hear what you found out so that they can pass tips onto their team or use what you say to justify the choices they make in their code. The next thing you have to do is don't act like you're writing a movie where you have to have a twist ending. You are not M. Night Shyamalan. Say what you're going to say up front. Tell them what the problem idea is, what the problem is, how you're going to solve it, and what you're going to achieve. Especially this is true for talk abstracts and outlines when you're submitting to conferences. It's okay to withhold the punchline, but you have to properly motivate the talk. And the point here is like nobody has a monopoly on the truth. If you're presenting something that's good, you are likely going to see other people in the community sort of thinking the same things as you are. Good stories can always be retold. No one turns down seeing Patrick Stewart play Macbeth because we already know the ending, right? Good example of this is context for all the things that Jason and I did. We said right up front, we're going to make JSON parser at compile time. Cool. The next thing you have to do is connect with the audience. And the good news here is that a lot of the questions they're going to ask in a technical context are pretty easy to anticipate. So you know that when you're talking to C++ developers, they're going to ask about, does this optimize well? Is this scalable? Is it flexible? Don't be afraid to share about how you feel about the subject or where you made mistakes, right? These were instructive for you. They're going to be instructive for your audience. So, you know, in the calendar talk I gave here almost a year ago, I showed a sort of side alley where I'm like, well, why can't we just take a time point and the period of the moon and calculate Easter that way? Well, it turns out it was an interesting exercise, but that's not how the church calculates Easter. So, you know, it's an interesting blind alley that I went down. The next thing I want to say is rhetoric is not a dirty word, right? So programmers are people, and it's, you know, although we all like to make logical arguments backed up with data, which is good, it's not the only or even the most effective way to communicate points. People are going to reject your objective arguments based on their subjective reasons. So you might as well be opinionated. You've done the work. And it's okay to say how you feel. It's okay to present subjective arguments and opinion as well as objective data. You should also, in general, try to optimize the talk, in my opinion, for the people in the room, not the YouTube audience. You're not trying to improve the YouTube score for the conference. You're trying to give the best talk you can to the people in the room, I think. By the way, I should say that these tips are all tips that I've learned, but it's not like I've always got them right, and I continue to get them wrong sometimes. I try to get them right. One thing I find hard is finding good examples. They can make a talk, or they can leave it kind of lying flat, but they can really make the difference. If you can give a bug story, that often connects with people, because we've all been there, right? We've all had gnarly bugs. We've all had those ups and the downs. The answer in general, when you have a talk, unlike when you have a headline, the answer to the question is always no, right? This is Betteridge's law. But in presentations, the answer is almost always yes, because you're asking, like, can we do something? 5 minutes, 14 seconds, in fact. One of the best sort of examples, one of the best things like analogies I ever came up with, well, I didn't come up with it, I read it, but it struck a chord, was that programming is to math as baking is to chemistry. So if I'm presenting something that's kind of mathy, sort of functional programming-ish, I made that analogy. And, you know, the great thing about it is that you can be a good baker without knowing chemistry. If you are a good baker, you kind of intuitively know something about the chemistry of the ingredients. And it's the same with math and programming. Learning a bit more chemistry can make you an even better baker. Please ignore the folks who say, oh, I never do a run through, I haven't finished my slides until the day. It's really, you get a lot from doing a real timed run through of a talk with a real audience, even if it's only your pet. I always find places where the flow of the script is kind of janky. You know, like I've mentioned something on slide 32 and I mentioned it again on slide 48 and I say the same thing and I didn't realize because I was writing slides and I wasn't giving the talk, right? Yeah, you've got to know where the beats are of your talk. You don't have many beats to hit. In my opinion, you should try and hit your time within 5 minutes. A common sort of newbie mistake is leaving time for questions. I would say to a first approximation, don't leave time for questions, right? Fill the hour within 5 minutes if you can. You can always take questions with people after the talk. Poor time control is the most common single cause of a bad talk. And I've seen it even from very experienced speakers who get their talks derailed and it just, you know, a talk where the time is controlled is way better. It's your job as the speaker to keep the talk on track. Even if people are asking questions, it's your job to keep the talk moving along. This is one where I haven't done a very good job over the years, and I'm trying to do a better job, but you'll notice my slides are black on white. This is generally a better choice for physical presentations. YouTube people complain if they see black on white, they want dark mode. But when you're in the room, this is much less likely to be washed out. So, you know, my advice would be choose a good high contrast color scheme. Comic Sans is not a bad font. It's fine. It's fine. It's very accessible, very readable, right? And do number the slides so that people, when they ask questions, can give you a slide number to go back to. So there are a few pitfalls to avoid. A very common thing I did and I tried to get myself out of was doing overly long introductions. When you've spent a long time working up a talk, you know all the motivation. You can easily spend 20 minutes talking to the audience about why you're doing this and all the things that sort of led up to it. And that's a third of your entire time. So to keep me honest, my rule of thumb is I like to show code by slide 10. Notice slide 9 had code on it. If you have a quote on a slide, and quotes often go to 3 or 4 lines, do read it verbatim. If you don't do this, everyone in the audience will be reading it while you're talking to them. They won't be hearing what you're saying because they'll be reading the quote. And the last tip is finish strong. There are only a few beats you get to control. You get to control the beginning and the end, and maybe there's a revelatory moment somewhere in the middle. Other than that, you can't control what people are going to remember from your talk. So at the end, do tie back to the start, do reiterate your takeaways, and let people know when to applaud. And the last slide is valuable real estate. Don't have a last slide that says, any questions? This slide stays up for several minutes. People can photo it, make sure it contains all the things you want people to take away. And that's it at 9 minutes 53.